Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 151 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, we've got a little bit of a grab bag, mostly looking at the 10.1 PTR, some tier acquisition changes. There's a blue post from Scarizard that's pretty big. More Aberrus raid testing, and then 10.0.7 came out this week, and it was kind of a dumpster fire.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that. And I guess this is all kind of related, but I know. How did your raid week go?
We great. We killed Raszageth, which was
Hell
awesome.
yeah!
Got that dragon down, killed them or her, I guess, on Tuesday, pretty early actually. Like we only had like an hour, I think, worth of pulls. Got Raszageth down. Definitely one of those pulls where like we hit phase 3 with I think almost everyone alive, maybe used one battle res at that point.
Yeah,
And then the boss just died, like extremely anticlimactic,
yeah. How
sort of like situation.
how much HP did the boss have going into phase 3?
It was at 37,
Okay,
I want to say.
yeah.
Yeah, like 37 and a half, somewhere in there. So yeah, we had a really good like second like P2 basically. But but yeah, no, it was a good raid, and then we went back, killed like two other like basically killed everything but Dathia. So we still had Sinarth
Oh
and
right, because you
Kurag up.
guys were you guys using
We
a
were just
lockout
extending.
that only
Yeah,
had Diurna and Aerodog dead.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually it had Council dead too for some reason. I think we killed Council like 2 weeks ago
Yeah,
randomly. But
probably.
yeah, just to get basically the folks that have been sitting out for like the past like 2 or 3 weeks. Because we did have a couple people that basically sat the entire prog, just to get them in the raid and
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
them a couple kills. But no, it was a great week. Killed the boss, dropped terrible loot. And yeah, so now we're back in farm mode. So we're actually we didn't raid Thursday, right? Because we had nothing left, and we'll take Tuesday off this week and just raid as best we can on Thursday, and then next week will be our regularly scheduled programming. So
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but this raid is significantly easier to reclear than I think any raid was in Shadowland. And I personally would put that down a lot to the lack of like push timer nonsense. There's
yeah,
no Kel'Thuzad or Remnant of Ner'zhul or Stone Legion Generals where the fight just changes every week unless you're really precise with your damage.
hmm
Um, and so it's actually like fairly chill to reclear. I would say that like so we recleared Friday. We did not get. We were like just an inch away from a one night clear.
oh
Um,
nice,
we had a great pull. We were at 35%, 34.6% going into phase 3 of Raszageth, which is
oh man,
insanity.
that's super low. Yeah,
Um, and then we got the 1 in 20, chance or 1 in 18 chance that the lightning breath targeted the person with the first bomb.
oh shoot,
And we
oh
had
no,
never, for all of Prague, we had never had that happen. So nobody had seen it before. Like, we had seen it because we had, like, the officers had seen it because we did prep and saw it, like, it happened. But it's just one of those
yeah,
things that you just don't think about. It's really dumb that it can happen, but it can
yeah,
happen. So it targeted the person. It was also targeted with magnetic charge, and they just like you have like half a second to shift right, and if you don't do it, we die,
you
and that
die. Yeah,
sucks. But we'll be back in
that's
on
rough.
Sunday or tonight, I guess, and
Nice.
finish it off. We could have still one night cleared if not for that. If we had been a little bit more efficient on other things, but like Dathia and Diurna and Raszageth are like the main ones that are potential time sinks for reclear.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, that's good. That you got your reclear basically. Well, you'll have recleared here. Is this your first full reclear then?
No, second. We
Second.
fully
Okay.
recleared last week as well,
Gotcha.
and yeah, like Raszageth last week was really like Raszageth is such a like I don't know. It's a very chill boss to reclear as long as you don't try and reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's just the fact that the boss is fairly scripted makes it so that it's actually possible for like all that practice to really result in consistency
Hmm.
without having to rely on a whole lot of, you know, um people being able to make as a group, like collectively make split second decisions. um we don't have somebody outside the raid making those calls, and sometimes, you know, you look at something like Sylvanas, the in phase 3, the soaks where they could spawn in random locations, and like sometimes you would get like 3 of them spawning right next to each other, and people would get mixed up as to which one was theirs to soak on the
Yeah,
immune
that's
set.
true.
And like by the end of the tier, we just like YOLO soak them, just like get in them and don't fucking wipe us, because we could heal through it if we had too many
Yeah.
people get the healing absorb. Um, but that wasn't the case early on in our reclears for sure.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so yeah, uh, you know, we'll go back in. It'll probably take us a little bit to get Raszageth dead tonight again. But we actually saw a bow last week. Got a
Oh,
mythic
nice.
bow.
Very
Um,
cool. Very cool.
so right in time for it to get nerfed into the ground. Part of 10.0.7.
Just in a couple weeks, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
so yeah, that was exciting.
nice. Yeah, and I guess our kill might be a little tainted, we'll say. Because of a couple of bugs. So yeah, so 10.0.7 came out this week, and plethora of bugs. I don't think we're gonna go through all of them, but safe to say, like there was, I think is it the conal ability still was bugged?
Yeah,
Um,
so the bug fix that they put out to fix conal abilities and stuff like Dream Breath got
mhm.
didn't make it into the 10.0.7 branch, I guess, and so they just like broke it again. Say,
Yeah, reverted it back. And then yeah, the one that we might have, I mean, we did not knowingly take advantage of this bug. However, we might have known about it in a couple of our polls late. Is that Warlocks had a bug where they have a talent that gives their pets, I think it's like 20% haste, and it was just giving the main player the 20% haste,
so it's
or
like
20% attack speed, right? And then that
it.
turns into haste.
Yeah, it was like the way it worked out was 5% bonus damage, just flat bonus damage for the warlock. Um, which then also then applies to their pets.
Yeah.
Exciting. And then also 6.5% haste, which then also applies to their pets. So it worked out to like a 15% damage, something like that for Warlock. Something ridiculous because of the way it's stacked.
Yeah.
Um, which resulted in, so Warcraft logs did a partition for 10.0.7, which means that like you're only ranking against logs that came out in 10.0.7 and beyond, not all the old logs. And that happened in part because there were also some like ranking rule changes. Frost tombs on Primal Council no longer count. You have to actually kill stuff on Dethea for it to count. For Karag, there's some ads you can spawn infinitely that no longer count. Stuff like
Hmm.
that. Um, they just like I say I did the announcement. We deleted rankings for the first day because of the Warlock bug, and just like then
God, but people are happy.
so there's the Furbolg trinket, the Furbolg
Oh
totem
yeah.
trinket, which if you've not heard about that, it's this trinket. It gives everybody in your group a chance to deal damage when it's active as long as they stay in range. Um, and it's actually like it's item level 392, but it's actually like one of the best trinkets you can get.
Yeah.
Or at least was when it was actually raid wide instead of party wide. Now it's
Yeah.
only your party, which makes it a lot worse. It's still, if you're playing an alt, playing an alt brewmaster or something, it's still like really good.
Hmm.
It's just probably not as good as like your whetstone grief torch kind of setup now. That's worth getting.
Gotcha.
So we had like all that damage gets reattributed to the person that uses the trinket now, but that wasn't the case on day one, so that also took out all of those logs.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but then on day two, they retuned all of the so there was this they had done some tuning on the gemstones, and there was a combo that people found for the Onyx Enelet ring that came out as part of 10.0.7. One combo in particular, there's Desirous Blood, Humming Arcane, and Prophetic Twilight. Those three stones. Humming Arcane just had a really, really high proc rate. Desirous Blood is technically a healing stone, but it does damage it like leeches. And then Twilight, the Prophetic Twilight one says, whenever your damage stone procs, your healing stone procs, and whenever your healing stone procs, your damage stone procs.
Oh, so it's procking back and forth.
So it's procking back and forth, and Humming Twilight was just the one with the highest proc rate. And so that, was very, very powerful. They broke that combo on day 2.
Okay.
There's now other combos that have been buffed to be, similar in value, but not as good. And then on Friday, they somehow reintroduced the Warlock bug.
But it was different on Friday though, right? Wasn't it? It wasn't the
Well,
exact same.
you didn't need the talent on Friday to
That's true.
benefit from it.
Yeah. That's true.
So you only had you had to switch specs and then summon a pet, and then you had the haste and the damage buff.
Yeah.
So it's a whole mess. Just a whole mess. And then the cherry on top is there's nerfs coming for several specs on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. God, along with the ret nerfs that went in right on Friday, which I don't think we'll talk too much about, but yeah, ret and PvP got absolutely not gutted, but no longer one-shotting people in a GCD.
Retribution Paladin, very good now. Very good now. Yeah. There was also a Retribution Aura bug that's been fixed where it wouldn't trigger when it was supposed to. That's been fixed. But man, oh man.
Lots of QAing in production. Lots of QAing in production, which is the best place. That is the truth.
I will say though, despite all those bugs are bugs that impact raids and dungeons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I encountered 0 bugs in the new zone.
I would agree, and we'll talk a little bit about this maybe in a bit. But other than the only bug I found was that I'm bugged in that I can't read well. And so I made a couple of mistakes in the way that I approach that, but we'll talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been a very eventful week. And I know there's been a bunch of frustration in at least the Brewmaster section of the Discord, people asking what's the best ring combo? And the answer changed over and over and over again, and we finally just gave up and said there's a pin, it's got the most recent info in it, check the timestamp. If it's old, ask again.
Yeah, we'll talk about that gem issue, which is funny. That's the main thing. So
yeah.
Well, there are tons of like you said, tons of player / item interaction bugs. Not many bugs with the new content, so, which is good and bad. But Blizzard's been quick to fix everything, which is good. So other than the bugs, some of the other big stuff that came out this week, we had a huge blue post from Scarizard, actually. Shout out to Scarizard, super awesome developer, super into talking to the community too. Because I know that I checked Twitter after this, and he was interacting with a couple people about the post. But Scarizard put out a huge post on the tier set acquisition, sort of the full philosophy around it. Sort of looking back and then looking a little bit forward into what's going to happen in 10.1. And it's really interesting. Does go into a little bit of their thought process, how it was introduced, right? A little bit of history of how it was introduced, and then sort of again what they're going to do moving forward. So I think a couple of key, highlights you could say from this. And I don't know if I missed anything else, we can always jump in. But so number one, the creation catalyst, they're removing all of the requirements for it other than time. So you'll no longer have to acquire a weekly quest or a currency to unlock the next charge of it. Charges come automatically. And then charges do require time. So every week you'll basically get one like you do today, except you'll get it without having to do anything, which I think is good. And then there also won't be a new currency to farm like Cosmic Flux was to use it. It's just there.
That's so basically the reasoning for this that they give is that one of the roles of the creation catalyst is to be a catch-up system for people that are just coming back later in the patch. And it wasn't really filling that role for those people because they had to do the weekly quest. So even like if you came back to Dragonflight, 8 weeks in, everybody else that was playing the whole time would have two charges of the catalyst. They could get 2 tier pieces, but you just coming back wouldn't have any way to catch up on that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have that initial 6 week period of not having it at all, but you know, you wouldn't be able to catch up quick. In Cosmic
Yeah.
Flux, similar problem where you come back and you just like don't have any Cosmic Flux, and now, like, I definitely ran into the issue, and I talked about this on the podcast, where even deep in the patch, I was having to go out and farm Cosmic Flux in order to have enough to tier set creation
Mhm.
on alts, and so this basically just means that you just get charges every week, and
Yeah.
yeah, they're there. Don't have to worry about it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. So that was. I think that was. It was sort of like the one of the biggest changes. The other, I guess, sort of looking through the rest of these like highlights, right? Other than the actual acquisition of the catalyst, what they've said is they're now adding a couple more ways to earn a piece of heroic tier or piece of tier. I'm sorry. Um, and so the master, I guess they're calling them the master achievements, but it's basically like completing the raid on heroic, getting 2200 in I think in your PvP rating,
2200
and
Mythic Plus rating.
oh, it's 2200 mythic plus rating, and then 1800 PvP rating. If you complete those, you get a one set piece token or one set piece item, which I think is good for particularly for the non raid folks. A way to maybe catch up or add an additional way to gather raid pieces, which I think is good. If you're somebody who only engages in PvP, you don't have to wait for like a random drop or for it to show up on some sort of um vendor thing. You sort of get a shot at least one piece early on. Um,
Yeah,
as you raid rating.
I mean, it'll make it pretty easy to get the two set without doing raid. Very
Mhm.
easy to get the two set without doing raid. You just get your token, you sit on it, and so you get a tier set item from the Great Vault. One of the interesting things from this post actually is they explicitly say that they dramatically increase the rate at which you see set items in the vault.
Yeah,
Um,
early on, yeah.
so you're much more likely to see one in the first couple of weeks, and that was actually true for this tier. And I know I saw multiple tier set pieces week one. I actually got a 424 tier piece the
Yeah,
first week that I could have. Yeah,
my shoulders are 424 from my vault. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's that. Um, so it's gonna make it fairly easy to get two set without doing
Hmm.
four set. Odds are good you're still gonna have, if you're not rating, you're still gonna have to wait for the creation catalyst to come out. It's just like
Yeah.
it makes it way more likely. Like, you can run the numbers and you'll see that having the one guaranteed piece that goes in any slot you want will make it much more likely for you to your four set before the catalyst comes out.
Right.
But you're still pretty far off from guaranteed. So I if you're not rating at all, you're probably waiting for creation catalyst to get your four set.
Yeah. And I can't. I mean, I was thinking about this tier, right? We didn't have anyone who didn't complete their four set before we like abandoned heroic, right? Like we weren't
Yeah,
sort of at the end waiting for one or two. It was like our final clear. I think we completed like the final like three or four sets we needed,
it,
was
it's
which was
really
good.
there's a so one of the things I like about this post um, is they go through some of the issues with tier sets in Sepulcher and why they were so problematic.
Hmm.
So bullet point number one, and I really want to highlight this: Sepulcher of the first ones as a raid was notoriously more difficult than intended. This meant that even very competent and committed guilds found it hard to take down Liavum, Halandris, and especially Anduin the very first week.
Right.
The other tier set bosses, Lords of Dread and Ragalon, were both very challenging and weren't available for the people that did clear the first week. And trading restrictions on tokens meant that you had tokens that just were not tradable, even though they weren't useful, and led to really awful like inversions where you wanted to do heroic and mythic first and then go back to normal to be able to trade those
Yeah.
pieces, which just meant that you were doing, heroic and mythic with less gear in order
Right.
to make sure you could trade the gear from the lower difficulty, which was just not great. But the combination of the difficulty with all of that meant that people weren't getting as many Great Vault rewards,
Choices. Yeah.
which meant fewer options and less of a chance of seeing a tier piece. And then also, the number of bosses you had to kill for each Great Vault slot for the raid row in particular was higher.
Yeah.
Specifically, that eighth vault slot, or the third raid vault slot, required 8 bosses, which meant you needed to kill Anduin. And Anduin was a major wall for a lot of guilds.
Oh yeah.
Um, like we got Anduin week 1, uh, you know, but it was tight, and a lot of guilds didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, it was it definitely I think Sepulcher with being the first raid back with tier sets in a while, like is hurt. The the idea of acquiring them sort of feels a little bit worse than it should have been just because of that difficulty curve. Right? Like I think the fact that Anduin was so hard and Anduin was like your gate into getting, I guess you could add two piece before Anduin, right? But
Yeah,
you're still like hoping for like both a Halandris and a Lahuvum drop, and then you get your two piece at least. But getting the three piece and eventual four piece was always tough with Anduin in the way. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think, so I think that change of like the bosses maybe not being as difficult, or not being as gated by difficulty, probably see less of a complaint of people like, or less, I guess, stories of people saying like, oh, I had to wait till the catalyst to like
yeah,
finish my four piece, which we had like two or three people in our raid do that, right?
yeah.
Um, right, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it was like one or two, um,
We
but yeah,
didn't.
no, it's
Yeah,
at least a good thing. So, or not, this is a good thing, I'll say.
yeah. The so this tier you only need 6 bosses, which means you don't have to do Diurna and Raszageth in order
Mhm.
to get um your tier slots or your Great Vault slots, and that like Diurna is a big step up in difficulty at like the heroic level, and
Mhm.
Raszageth is another very big step up.
Yeah.
So that helped. Um, no more trading restrictions meant that we could actually do the raids in like difficulty order and take the extra loot we got from normal and use that to make heroic easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
trading restrictions helped. So, um, but yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else in this post I wanted to
the other
highlight. I don't.
the Omni-Token.
Oh, right. The
So
Omni
there's
token, right?
two sources of this Omni-Token. One is that one time per character thing where you get your Mythic Plus rating or your PvP rating or your AOTC achievement, and that gives you a one-time Omni-Token just guaranteed.
Hmm.
The other source of it is the end boss of Aberrus. Scale Commander Scarizard is going to drop an Omni-Token. We don't know the
Ooh.
specifics of how many, if it's going to be like guaranteed 2, like the tier set tokens are on other bosses. Um,
Uh huh.
but the presence of an Omni token there is actually going to be really nice
Right.
for helping fill out people's 4 sets. One of the issues we ran into this tier is we actually had a really low amount of venerated pieces drop from a couple of specific bosses. So it
Uh
was
huh.
like whatever the token on Sinarth is, we had virtually no venerated Sinarth, which meant people were like using LFR Sinarth items because we just didn't have any drop in heroic or mythic. Um,
Uh huh.
but the Omni token would mean like, okay, we could just target, hey, very few venerated tokens drop. Who's got the worst like venerated gloves? Let's handle that. So that will
Yeah.
be nice. The other thing, last thing for this, which I have very mixed feelings about, but they are planning to at some point during the 10.1 patch cycle reduce the number of tier set tokens that are guaranteed to drop.
Yeah. Which I think they mentioned this in the context of like, as you farm the raid more and more, there becomes less of a reason that you want any sort of secondary loot, like non-tier set loot, right? And I think I I kind of like this change in that it does free up the ability for like we'll say more people to get loot, right?
Yeah.
Because like the idea is they're reducing the tier sets, but they're still
It's
keeping the
going to
number
be
of
the
drops
same
the
number of
same.
items, yeah. So
Right, yeah.
on the one hand, I don't like the um I don't like the just like we're gonna modify the loot later in the tier. It just like I don't know, feels arbitrary in a way that bothers me. I
Yeah, but they
understand the reasoning for it, and I think the reasoning for it is sound. I just feel like it's it's treating a symptom rather than the underlying problem, right?
which is we get geared too fast.
No, the underlying problem is that you have these class set tokens, and then partway through the patch, you just no longer need to like acquire them from the raid. It's not like regular items
Okay.
where later on in the patch you may already have your items, but they can still drop from the boss, and that's just normal,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah.
these you can get them at a high rate through the Great Vault, and you also later in the patch just have the creation catalyst to convert items into tier set pieces, so you don't need to
Yeah.
get them from raid. And so that feels like maybe instead of manipulating the loot table halfway through the tier, they just like give us creation catalyst week one. And
Yeah, but
I've never been in the give us catalyst week one kind of camp, but if they're gonna do this, it just feels like maybe they should do it that way instead.
yeah, but I really what they're I mean the reasoning for this, and I think it's sound, is that like there's an eventual point where like your rage just has no use for tier pieces,
Yeah,
right? Like other than like a tertiary reroll, right?
yeah.
Which is like such a
Like
low chance, but
we're pretty close to that point now because we've had enough great vaults that people just have mythic
yeah.
tier pieces. In some cases
Right.
higher than the raid drops, like a 421, mythic plus tier piece, um, that's higher level than what Senarth drops.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I think we've hashed the creation catalyst a couple times. I'm just not on board with the whole more easy to provide loot right out of the gate. Like
Yeah,
I think it's fine waiting a couple weeks. Maybe 6 weeks is too long, but
yeah.
at least in terms of the catalyst, it's like yeah, I think it's useful.
So
And I
I guess I don't know if I actually like explained what they're doing. But to be clear, what they're talking about doing is at some point during the tier, unspecified, at some point during the tier, they are going to be reducing the number of class set tokens that they're guaranteed to drop from 2 to 1, um, per 20 players. So it's like
yeah.
instead of it being one guaranteed drop per 10, it's gonna or yeah per 10, it's gonna be like one guaranteed drop per 20 or something like that. They're still working out
Uh-huh.
the details, but the reasoning is that you reach a point like we were talking about where you just don't need tier set tokens. But the presence of those tier set tokens artificially like deflates your chance of seeing the other items. To use Kurog as an example,
Gotcha.
this tier, controlled current technique off of Kurog. Very good trinket for a number of specs, but because half of the loot you get from Kurog is always tier set tokens, um, there's just a lower chance that you're going to see that controlled current technique show up off of the boss.
Yeah.
So basically, it's midway through the tier, they're gonna just like not give um tier set like as many tier set tokens, so you have a higher chance of seeing that other loot. And like,
Yeah.
I kind of that makes sense to me. I've complained a lot about personal loot's impact on loot tables and like not seeing as many vein rippers because of how personal loot was structured and all that stuff.
Right, right, right. Yeah, but I mean I don't know. I think for me the I don't know. I don't see it as I think as such a large issue, right? Like I think in general, um, yeah. I mean, I think in general, there's enough ways to collect your tier set at this point that like you are literally not playing the game if it takes that long.
Well,
Like if it
no, you're
takes,
just not rating.
well, no, I mean
If you're not rating, it will
because
take until the catalyst comes out for a lot of people.
well, fair. I mean, if you're just doing one of the three content pathways, right? You're only getting your 3 slots in the vault
Well,
because
no,
the
no, no,
vault. They
because
also said the same thing to the vault.
even 2 slots, because you only get to pick one item from the Great Vault each week, even if you're doing Mythic Plus and PvP.
Right. But I mean, like, what I'm saying is they've I think in the same post they talk about the increased drop rate also
Right.
carries over into the vault too. So like the vault also has that increased drop rate. So yeah, I mean if you're doing PvP or PV or just Mythic Plus, yeah, you will generally have a lower chance to complete your 4 set before the catalyst. But at the same time, I don't think introducing the catalyst earlier, just because those it takes longer for those two groups to do it, like is I don't know, it's like a reason to do it. Just like if you don't do Mythic Plus, the expectation is that you can drop in and start doing, 20s or 25s, like and
Yeah.
get 424 loot right away. Like there's a
It just
I,
basically, I feel like they painted themselves into this corner where they've got tier sets, they're massively important, and the expectation that the community has now is that if you're doing, a 20 or an 18 or a 15 week 1, week 2,
yeah.
3, week 4, you should have a 4 set. And so people just kind of expect that, at a certain point
Well,
you're
yeah.
going to have it. So it's not really Blizzard's in a situation where they have to make sure you could do that because that's what community has built that expectation. So people have to be able to meet the expectation. But
Yeah.
then in order to do that, they have to then change the loot tables midway through the tier because you reach that point and then you no longer need the items. So
Yeah,
like
but
the problem is like that they are the sets are so important from a community perspective that you have to make them really really easy to get,
yeah.
but they're
Yeah.
still tied to the boss drops, so that means that like the only way you make them easy to get from a boss is like giving them as guaranteed loot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just feel like maybe if they want them to be really easy and reliable to get, the best way to do that is just not have them as guaranteed loot on the bosses and instead have just a pathway like this master token to
Hmm.
acquire tier outside of the context of a boss drop, and like the boss
Yeah.
drops can be extra but not be the primary.
Yeah. I mean, that's one option. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, I think a couple things help with this, right? Like I think the Omni token, before we make major changes, I think we should see
Yeah,
like the Omni token probably helps in terms of identifying, who gets what, and then the increased drop rate in general on tier sets, particularly from your vault, I think is helpful. Like I've
yeah.
definitely noticed that where like I don't think I've seen a tier set in probably 5 or 6 vaults at this point. But early on, I would see at least one piece every week, right, for the first like 3 or 4 weeks.
I
So
see a couple of tier pieces every week, I think, where I'm still getting like 5-6 fault slots, right? I'm seeing like 1 to 2
gotcha.
pretty reliably. um
Yeah, even I mean, still that's great because I haven't seen one. I feel like I haven't seen one in forever. But I've been doing like 3 or 4 vault slots, so not a
yeah,
ton. But
my DK
um,
is basically done with gear, right? So there's very little I can get from my vault at this point. I know I
yeah,
had the hardest decision, worst choice to have to make on my
okay,
vault last week. I had the mythic Aranog ring, which is super
okay,
good, and
yeah.
mythic Storm Eater's boon
Oh Jesus,
in my
that's
vault.
like that's like that's like my trinket dilemma
Yeah,
when I had the mythic icon and then a mythic brood keepers.
yeah.
And then the next, I don't know if we followed up on that story, but the next week, guess what I got
They
in my
pop.
vault again?
Oh, you got the
I got a
Broodkeepers?
no, I got a no, I got a mythic icon in my next
Okay,
vault, and I'd
nice.
already taken it. I was so
Yeah,
pissed. I'm like, I think that's actually the last vault I opened. I think at that point I'm like, I'll get vaults if I do
that's
raid, but I'm not doing
hilarious.
anything else. Like I'm over this.
That's
Those are
hilarious.
just trolling me. So
Yeah, I took the Aranog ring, which was probably correct. Uh,
yeah,
if they hadn't nerfed the Furbolg totem, it would have been 100% correct. Yeah,
yeah,
but then the
that's
other, like,
funny.
I had 4 slots in that vault, and the other 2 were tier items that were worse than the ones I had on.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Because like one of them was like a Sunarth love token or whatever it is that was like
Uh huh.
418. But I had 421 gloves from the Mythic Plus row, and the other one was from the Mythic Plus row and was 421 shoulders, but I have the Broodkeeper Mythic shoulders, which is like real
Gosh, oh,
first world
jeez.
problems, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah.
That's hilarious. Oh man. But yeah, but I
Anyway,
guess Yeah, I think in general we got new new tier acquisition stuff coming in 10.1. So it seems like they're trying to tweak the system, get it maybe closer to what they want. But
One thing about this is going to be really interesting is how this interacts with the upgrade token stuff. So you being able to like take, you know, a
yeah,
heroic tier piece and turn it into mythic eye level and stuff. So that's going to be super interesting. I'm very curious to see how all of this plays out. I'm not
uh-huh.
fundamentally like I don't think the sky is falling over the like manipulating loot tables thing. I just think it takes something away from just like you kill it like a boss has a loot table. You can make
Yeah.
decisions based on it. But I do think that they're making changes to try and make things better is good. Overall, I think they're on a good track. I just like that specific change is like I feel like it's
Yeah.
the wrong change.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. All right, we'll move on. I think forward a little bit to a couple other things. So we did have raid testing this week, like always. So Friday was jam packed with 3 bosses, right? Was it?
The bosses, in
Yeah,
theory,
in theory. And I heard. So I didn't do raid testing as typical for me, but I did not hear great things. I think some of the feedback I got was the Neltharion fight was basically just a target dummy. Nothing really happened. And then I think
well,
one of
the
the fights,
Neltharion fight was bugged.
well, that too. Yeah, I think that was the issue.
So the
And that was sort of the
first
theme, right?
yeah the first 4 bosses that we tested were actually like didn't really encounter any significant bugs. They all worked. These ones had bugs. Uh, so actually the whole experience was buggy. If we got on, for raid testing 4 o'clock on Friday, Eastern time,
Uh-huh.
and the you couldn't stay in the server or in the raid instance. Like you would go in and it would say
Jeez,
you're out of bounds and teleport you out. And so
that's
raid testing didn't
funny.
even start for like 25 minutes, and then you could finally get in, and we went to the first boss. And then the first
Jeez.
boss was the spawn trigger for it was bugged, so you couldn't do it.
Oh, okay.
So they switched us over to the second boss. So the first boss was supposed to be Forgotten Experiments. That one was bugged. We couldn't do it. They switched us over to the second boss, which is Magmorax. This is like a lava hydra thing. Um, and like the main mechanic of it is that there are these lava puddles that spawn. And if you remember the last boss of Vault of the Wardens, where it's got the shadow puddles that you take the light over to them and it protects you, and you
Yeah.
get rid of the purple puddles so that they don't fill the whole platform. That's kind of the thing here. There's no light, you just go and you stand in it.
Gotcha.
But you stand
Okay.
in it and you soak them up, and that keeps the platform from getting full.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but this is very much like a sludge fist kind of like you just kill the boss before you run out of platform kind of deal. Um,
Gotcha.
and so there's not a lot of complexity there. There's some very janky things, like you get a debuff, a stacking debuff while you soak. That if you're just in one puddle, it stacks up to 10 times. But if you're in
Uh-huh.
two, it will stack higher.
Oh,
So
okay.
it feels like there's like this internal counter that's not part of the debuff
Like
that
per, yep.
per
Oh, sorry.
puddle,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes it so you can only soak 10 ticks from each puddle, but it's not
Okay.
shown in a clear way.
Interesting. Interesting.
Um, the big thing that we ran into is just like if you remember the end of the Ajara fight on Mythic, where you had to have everybody had to be soaking the things to keep the stacks
Okay.
low from keeping the raid from exploding.
Right. Yeah.
It's not going to literally explode the raid if people don't soak these, but you will run out of space. Um, and it's more than just like, oh, the raid's going to take a bunch of damage. If the boss is in a lava puddle,
Uh-huh.
it gains a bunch of energy and does pulsing raid damage. When the boss hits 100% energy, that's actually the enrage.
Okay.
So if you never have the boss gain energy from the lava puddles, it's like a 6-minute enrage. But every tick of the lava puddles cuts like 15 seconds off of that.
Okay.
So it's very, very easy to drop it accidentally from like a 6-minute enrage to a 4.5-minute enrage. We actually had some, so there's 2 ways that puddles get spawned, right? One of them is there's some that get applied to people and they just get to put them somewhere and you can control that. The boss will also spawn some in random locations, and we had one actually spawn underneath the boss,
Oh, jeez. Okay.
which is just absolute nonsense. That
Oh
should
yeah,
not
I
be
can imagine.
possible. There should be like a minimum distance from the boss that they have to spawn, unless there's
Okay.
literally nowhere that they could, right? But that wasn't the case here. It was like the first random spawn that we got was just underneath the boss.
Jesus. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a very simple fight. There's some jank like you're on a platform and there's lava all around the platform, but the lava actually doesn't do that much damage. So you can take the puddles out into the lava, drop them, and then Z-axis them.
Okay.
That's getting fixed. That's been reported by a number of people, I'm sure, but that's getting fixed. Uh,
Jeez.
because it just means that like you can just never do any like you only have to deal with the random spawns because those ones won't. You can't. You have to actually
Right.
soak those. But all the ones that are on players, you can just go out in the lava and drop them off back
Mm-hmm.
and never have to soak them. Um, so
Easier.
that's gonna get fixed. The lava will just like I don't know kill you or something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then there was Echo of Neltharion. Like Magmorax had no bugs really. Like there was the jank with the puddles and the Z-axis stuff, but like nothing that kept you from like seeing the boss.
Right.
Um, Echo of Neltharion. So this is a kind of a neat fight. Phase one is very target dummy ish. There's the boss is gonna divide the room into like 7 areas. It's like a pentagon with the or a hexagon with the center split off from the edges. Um, and the tank mechanic does a knockback, and as you get knocked back into the wall, it breaks the wall, and then you can move through it, and then the wall gets rebuilt after a period of time. There's also a mechanic that goes on DPS and healers that does the same thing. They get knocked back if they go into a wall. They take extra damage and a dot,
Yeah.
but then you get to move through the wall. At least on heroic, there was no reason to ever have the DPS do it. You just always had the tank do it, and that let you move to the next section. Because periodically the boss
Gotcha.
just does a huge AOE that leaves a permanent puddle for the rest of the phase, and so you just need to be able to move into the next area in
Okay.
order to not be standing in it. Um,
But I heard that was not how that fight went played out.
well, then we get to phase two.
Yeah.
Phase two, there's some like old god dudes that spawn that are unattackable. They're untargetable. Unless you are corrupted, which this is the Neltharion like class call mechanic. Um,
Gotcha.
if you get corrupted, then you can see the ads and you can attack them. And what the
Okay.
dungeon journal says is supposed to happen is that they're supposed to have a shield that's like not huge,
A
but
moderate shield.
a moderate shield. And when the shield is broken, then everybody can attack them.
Oh, okay.
They didn't have a shield.
Oh, jeez.
Um,
Okay.
so the only time they were attackable is if you were corrupted. And the only way
Gotcha.
you could actually get through phase two, I know, or I heard that there were a couple that did, was by like hardcore class stacking. Because the way the class call works is everybody that's of the same class gets called at the same time. Like it's all paladins or all monks or all priests.
Gotcha.
Um, and then those people get to attack the ads. So if you just like went in with like 12 hunters and a couple of tanks and a healer or something like that, you could
Yeah.
just like have all of the hunters murder the ad. Like you can kind of cheese it like that. As opposed to
Gotcha.
how it's supposed to work where the shield gets broken and then everybody gets to damage it. So that everybody got kind of hard stuck at that point. The
Okay.
boss shields at 40% HP until you kill all of the ads, but you just couldn't kill the ads. And actually, once he shields, this is something they'll need to fix. Once he shields, he stops doing corruption. So if at that
Oh,
point you haven't broken all 3 shields, you actually just have bricked your pull. You can't progress.
his wipe. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but that shouldn't be an issue because like the ads had on the difficulty we were on, the ads had like 17 million health. The shield they're supposed to have is like 200k.
Jesus.
So it's supposed to be much, much, much easier to get them, to a point that the raid can damage them. And then the rest of the class call is actually supposed to be like not killing your raid with the class call. It's not supposed to be like, you know, min-maxing it, at least on heroic to do damage to the
Yeah.
ad.
Yeah.
Um But also, some of the class calls are awful. Awful, awful, awful. So, I was on my Death Knight for this. What the Death Knight class call is you literally like take a shit on the ground, and there's a just a. You remember the like fuzzy ground effect from like Uldir?
I think so. Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Mothballs, basically.
it's like that, like the
Okay.
ground effect that gets spawned when you touch the mothball.
Okay.
Um, it's like that, just a big area. But then also every 15 seconds, you just mass grip the whole raid to you.
Nice.
And
Nice.
that mass grip, like the area denial for that, you just kind of have like if you get it, aside from the part where you have to like break an ad out, you really as a Death Knight should just move out of the raid and just stand
Drop
there
it. Yeah.
and drop it. But then the whole raid gets mass grip to you.
Yeah.
Like this is the kind of thing where on Mythic you just don't bring a Death Knight.
Yeah.
You just don't
Yeah.
bring Death Knights at all. Um, the priest one's really bad. They just periodically fear everything around them. Not as bad though, because a priest actually can just stand out in the corner and still do their thing.
Yeah.
Like we had a couple priests, and they were trying to like they get a buff when they fear people,
Uh
a
huh.
damage buff. So we were trying to like kill the ad, right? So that we were letting them like, um, because that would let them get a damage boost to hopefully kill the ad. It didn't work. The damage boost was not enough. But
Gotcha.
at least like for that class call, you could just have the priests stand against the edge of the room and not worry about it. Some of the other ones were pretty problematic too. The hunter one spawns animals that attack
Uh
the
huh.
hunters, and they will actually melee the hunters, and nobody else can interact with them. So we had a couple cases of hunters literally just like getting meleeed, including survival hunters. So like a BM hunter, you can just kite them, which I think is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like kite them and have them explode on the ad, and that's supposed to be the whole thing. But the survival hunter can't do that. So like
Yeah.
you just can't play survival on that fight, um, without changes to that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
What was
so
the monk call?
I honestly couldn't tell you. We had it happen once, and in that one case where we had it happen, the monk was locked in a different section of the room.
Fair enough. Fair
Uh,
enough.
so yeah, but
What?
the fight was just buggy. And then we at that point they had managed to fix Forgotten Experiments, working. Oh, I guess the final thing that they did to try and like let us test phase 3 is they turned off the ads altogether.
Okay. Okay.
Except that they didn't like the trigger wasn't set up for checking if all of the ads were any of the ads were alive. It was like I don't know, counting how many ads had died. So we reached the point where we were supposed to push, and the boss just shielded it.
Gotcha. It didn't do
So
anything.
and you just couldn't progress. So at that point, they just like we're turning on Forgotten Experiments. We fixed you can start the fight now. Um,
Nice.
so we did that. Honestly, like on heroic, there's very little to say about this boss. Like it's one three bosses, one after another. Kind of like the gauntlet boss in Azavesh Streets,
Hmm.
where it's just one to the next and the next. Except they all like you. It's always you kill one and then the next one spawns. It's not HP based. On Mythic, it's supposed to be HP based, so that's much closer to Tazavesh Streets on Mythic. Uh,
Gotcha.
but each one has a handful of mechanics, and you just like mechanics. Slight problem. It was apparently set up that if you killed the second boss in the 3, it counted as a
Okay.
kill, and the boss wouldn't respawn.
The whole fight. That's funny.
Yeah. So we killed the second boss, and then wiped on the third one, and then couldn't actually test anymore without going out and like remaking all that stuff.
I
And at
like
that
saw,
point,
yeah, like soft latch you, yeah.
we were just like, okay, we're just done with testing for today, guys. We were getting at the point like I raid on Friday, so at that point it was like an hour 45 until my raid. So I was like, okay, at this point I'm going to be done. And then we had enough people that were like, yeah, we've been doing testing for 2.5 hours. Well, testing in theory for 2.5 hours. In practice, it was more like an hour and a half. But
That's funny. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, it's most of what I heard was that very similar. At least the narrative was like first boss tested okay. seemed good, but then the next two there was just a plethora of bugs that sort of limited
Yeah.
how like much testing you could actually do. So
Yeah.
um,
I think the one boss this raid that is actually really problematic. So at this point, we've tested every boss on heroic, I believe.
uh-huh.
There might be one that we didn't test on heroic. I'm not sure. I think no. Yeah, one that we haven't tested because there's 9 bosses. We've tested 7. There's one we haven't tested. I couldn't tell you what it is.
Uh-huh.
The one that has seemed actually like legitimately problematic from a design standpoint is Echo of Neltharion. The class calls fundamentally are not going to work on Mythic the way they're set up. Like,
Gotcha.
there's several of them that are just so bad that you can't bring them. Like the Death Knight one.
Yeah, yeah. The
If
mass script,
Mythic,
yeah.
like, an Echo of Neltharion is the second to last boss of the raid. If
Uh-huh.
Echo of Neltharion is hard, then you can't bring a Death Knight to that fight as it
Yeah.
stands right now because it will just make it like the only way you could justify it is if Death Knight is so brokenly overpowered that it is worth dealing with it.
Yeah.
But it's even
Yeah.
like you can't bring multiple then because then you just like the whole raid gets chain mass gripped.
Yeah.
Like if you bring 3, it's just like every 5 seconds the whole raid gets mass gripped, and your casters literally cannot do anything while the 30-second corruption is on those Death Knights.
Yeah, it might be interesting to see for that, like if they can do like a range thing, right? Where you can outrange it, and that way you're only pulling melee. But
But even then, you're dropping the puddle under you, so you can't be in melee really either. The puddle does a lot of damage.
gotcha. And is the mass grip on the puddle drop like at the same time?
No, it's staggered. So like you could drop the puddle and then move out of it, but
Yeah.
you're still like then mass gripping the raid around. And if you had 3 Death Knights, they couldn't all be in melee at once. Because of the puddles. Like I guess you could have them stack on each other and just like hard stack and follow each other around. But
Yeah,
even
or
then,
or yeah, I guess there's a bunch of different strategies we could use for that. So
at that point,
um,
just bench your Death Knights. Like
yeah, well,
just don't bring a Death Knight. Similar thing with some of the other ones. Just like don't bring priests. Like priest is much easier to play around with, but just like don't bring one. Um, and
for
then
it.
there's the element of the corruptions are all damage boosts. So at the top end, what's going to happen, unless they change something, is the world first kill on this boss will have like 2 classes in it total.
Gotcha.
Outside of like stuff that's absolutely necessary for comp, but like it always is going to alternate corruptions at that point. If you just bring 2 classes, like let's say the paladin one, like the paladin one's good. Paladin one's very
Uh-huh.
easy to deal with. It like execution sentence, the like retribution paladin thing. It's like that except it's a puddle on the floor instead of a targeted thing.
You can move out
So
of it. Yeah.
you can move out of it, but you can also just like have your whole group of paladins just like hard stack on each other. They honestly don't even need to. It takes forever to fall. So like they could just like kind of be on each other on the boss, and it
Uh-huh.
does damage to the boss. So it's just a huge damage boost for
That's
the
good.
entirety of phase 2. Um, and if you had only paladins, you would just chain get that one corruption
Uh-huh.
and just like huge damage boost the whole time for the one class. Paladin's probably the only class that you could actually like only play that class right now. Retribution Paladin is very good. Holy Paladin is good. Uh, Prop Paladin is very good. Um, no other class, I don't think you could do that. Like you couldn't do it with. I don't think Windwalker is good enough pure single target that you Walker, Brewmaster, and Mistweaver are both good. So like maybe more realistically, you pick like 2 or 3 classes, and then you have like a third of your raid buffed at a time. But the
Yeah.
more class diversity you have, the worse the damage buff gets. Because it's
From
only
corruption.
yeah, because it only picks like it's gonna pick a random class. And it's not that if you don't have the class it does nothing. It picks from the classes you have. So if you have more classes, like if you have a single person that's a Death Knight, get one
Yeah, I see what
person
you're
that's
saying.
corrupt.
So like, yeah, so the idea is it's not that it's just the number of people that will get corruption is
Yeah.
based on the number of people you have
of the same
stacked on a
class.
specific class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to really, really, really encourage class stacking. Like you find the
Yeah.
ones
Unless,
with the least dangerous, most impactful corruption things, and you just stack it.
yeah. Yeah. And I think the way around that is you don't do the class calls by class. You just pick 4 random people and they're
Yeah.
called.
Yeah.
Right. And then like, then you have to, well, then you have to deal with overlaps of things. But
Right.
yeah,
And then there's
there's probably a way around it.
and I don't know. I so like that would kind of suck because then that it's also going to end up in situations where like you just don't bring death knights, or insert class here after they make further changes to the class calls. You just don't bring whatever 3 or 4 classes are just have really bad class calls, even if they're not individually bad. If they can
Yeah.
interact badly with the other ones, like you can imagine priest plus death knight. If they leave the priest fear in and the death knight mass grip in, well, the whole raid, including the priest, gets mass gripped onto the death knight and then feared.
Yeah.
So even if
Yeah.
individually you could deal with them, together you can't, and so you just cannot bring both a priest and a death knight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably some feedback Blizzard will take because I think, yeah, like the idea of number one, you don't want to force class stacking,
Right.
right? Because that's just unfun. And the other side of it too is you don't want to force classes not to be brought because of their whatever
Yeah.
their call is. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess we'll see on that fight. Like, it'll be interesting to see what changes they make, particularly
Yeah.
since I mean, knowing that testing was mostly bugged outside of like P1. I'm assuming they'll.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
actually,
we had
I don't know
plenty
if
of
they'll come
time.
back to it,
Like,
but
it wasn't like we were just dying in phase 2. We just couldn't progress out of phase 2. So we could sit in phase
yeah,
2 for like 5 minutes
yeah,
and just see the different class calls going on. So there's lots of data about that, but not about
hmm,
anything else in the phase.
that's fair. That's fair. Well, cool. I mean, I guess with only one more heroic testing, at least scheduled session set up.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see if they bring this back, right? Or if they have other
Yeah.
like second round testing on these on like Echo or anything or one of the other fights. Um, So cool. I guess moving maybe a little bit forward here. There was a couple of notes that came out from well, along with this, there's a couple things data mined and a couple of notes on changes. So first off, there was an interesting cloak that was data mined or that was on the Dungeon Journal. One of the
This
very
was
rare ones.
available for raid testing this week. So a lot of people.
A lot of people test it out. Yeah, so it's interesting where it basically will steal whenever a nearby ally takes damage, you basically steal a portion of their secondary stats and combine it with your combine and then sort of boost your own secondary stats. Um, whatever secondary stat sorry is the highest for you. And so yeah, so it steals their lowest secondary and then increases your highest secondary, which is an interesting effect. I don't know. I mean, 157 secondary stats, at least on the mythic version of this, doesn't seem too terrible.
So
Um, but
my so there's a couple things. One, you get a buff when there's somebody near you that has this cloak on, letting you
mhm,
know that you could have your stats stolen. So when everybody had this cloak on for raid testing, my whole buff bar was just like 10 of these.
nice, nice.
Um, there was that. But then also, like, if all of them triggered at the same time while I was on my Death Knight, it would actually put me in negative versatility,
Okay.
which is just like actually like you take 3% more damage now. I mean, it wouldn't be that high. It would be like you take 1% more damage now.
Right.
That's kind of weird. That would require them to all proc at the same time,
Hmm.
but which is not guaranteed. But I think it's a neat flavor element. Like it steals somebody else's stats to give them to you. I think it's neat
Yeah.
flavor. Um, it definitely like it should just not be able to stack that buff or that debuff
Okay.
on you. Like I, the
Yeah.
negative stat is just like not a real part of the budget of this item, or shouldn't be a real part of the budget
Right.
for this item. Um, so just like make it not stack and don't worry about it, and then it's fine. Like honestly, anybody giving people grief over losing 157 of a secondary for like 10 seconds out of every 2 minutes is just not somebody you should be taking seriously.
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
the other part of this proc, like they like steal the stats, they get the buff, a buff equal to the stats stolen basically, but then they also get like 2200 of their highest secondary stat.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So like that 2200 just hugely outweighs any negative stats they're taking.
Gotcha.
So as long as they make it so that you can't just like imagine if your lowest stat was like haste, right?
Hmm.
And you can go into negative haste, and imagine just like, your whole raid has this later in the tier, and it just procs, and you're like, wow, my GCD went from like 1.2 seconds to 1.7, 1.6, and it's like that just sucks. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean I guess we'll see how it sort of plays out, but it is interesting that Blizzard's experimenting with items like this where there's like a minor negative, but then it's like I feel like it seems like a very solid like, positive in terms of equipping the cloak. So,
yeah, I mean it
um
seems super good.
yeah. Yeah. Um well, cool. Well, then along with this stuff, they did on 10.1, they did put out another set of PTR notes. We're not going to read all of them. They're really the only, I think, a couple of items for both Mistweaver, Brewmaster, and Windwalker within this, and mostly it was our set bonus tuning. So no, for Mistweaver, ours changed from 5% mana over 6 seconds to 5% mana over 5 seconds. So we get mana, I think, a little quicker. But then I think coupled was this also the patch I want? I know they did additional changing. Yeah, so they eventually changed this again a little bit later in the same week to 3% mana every 3 seconds or over 3 seconds. I'm sorry.
So is this still
And
like you just still have infinite mana, right? With this set
so that
bonus currently.
not it's not infinite mana, but they did tune the proc rate. So we found out now we'll be able to test a little bit that it procs off of renewing mist ticks. I think it's
Ah,
huge. And so right now it's at a four, based on the data mine data, it's a 4% chance to proc with no ICD that we could notice. Although people who've been testing this a little bit more than me might have found something. But it's still the same amount of mana. It's just less mana over less time. So
yeah,
to keep the buff up consistently, you need more
a lot
procs.
of renewing mists out.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
which you're gonna push anyway. So I mean, I think it's near always up, if not, on the higher side of like 70-80% of the time you'll have this buff up.
This is
So it's
gonna
a nice.
be this is gonna have some really awkward like interactions with raid size in flex content. Like this set bonus is so much better in a 30-person group than in a 10-person group, just because like there's a cap on the number of renewing mists
Yeah.
you can have out, right? But it's higher than 10.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a minimum like 10 or even the 5-man content, right, you're not gonna see the the same amount of power as someone in a larger rate sizes. But I mean, to be completely honest with you, once you get above probably 15 or 16, like you're not gonna have, you know, 16, 17, 18 renewing miss out on the raid. Like
Yeah, yeah.
there are windows where that might happen.
But
But
they're
like
narrow.
consistently,
Yeah.
yeah, consistently you can hit 10, I feel like, in
Okay.
general. Or
So
like
maybe it's not actually
so
a big deal, aside from like the whole Mythic Plus thing, where it is just worse in Mythic Plus because you are hard capped at having 5 out.
right, exactly. Exactly. But you always have 5 out. So yeah, I mean, materially they did lower the proc chance from 5% to 4%. So like along with these changes that was also included, but honestly, it's still a very strong two piece. The biggest thing for Mistweavers and what they're testing here is it's reducing some of the reliance Mistweaver can have on external mana sources,
Yeah.
which is, as a Mistweaver, probably huge. I think you can argue there's always the innervate argument about which class or which, target is the best for innervate, who uses it the best and all that fun stuff. I think Mistweaver, at least in my opinion, is probably one of the better innervate targets. And so people who get innervate can, efficiently spend a ton of mana, which is great. This sort of helps smooth that, reliance on, we'll say, external mana.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like a test bed for, maybe making some changes in the future. Um, so yeah, so that happened. And then I guess I don't know, the brewmaster changes, at least the 4 set changes were announced but not put on PTR yet. So
Yeah. So I honestly couldn't tell you what the old version of this was. It was up for such a short amount of time. The new version of it, Rising Sun Kick grants a stack of Elusive Brawler, and when you dodge, the damage and critical strike chance of your next Spinning Crane Kick or Rising Sun Kick is increased by 5%, stacking up to 5 times. So there's a couple of notable things about this. One, um, you have to take Rising Sun Kick now. You
mhm.
actually have to. Like you technically didn't before, everybody did, but you actually have to in order to use your tier set now. because the trigger is now Rising Sun Kick. I think Blackout Kick, Sun Kick.
Gotcha.
And the dodge has some interesting interactions. So, for example, in an AoE setting, AoE tanking setting, you can have multiple things hit you while you have 100% dodge from Elusive Brawler. All of them dodge all of them with the 100% dodge and then lose your stacks, which could result in just instantly gaining the 25%, the max damage bonus from this. There's some questions as to how this is actually going to interact with Spinning Crane Kick. It wasn't on the PTR this week, so we couldn't test it. But other things like Counter-Strike have some kind of bad interactions with Spinning Crane Kick, where they like only buff the first tick and then go away because the Spinning Crane Kick being implemented really weirdly. It's like it's a channel. Each tick is a cast technically, and so like there's some stuff that still I believe actually is consumed by the first tick cast instead of being present for the whole channel. So that's, we'll have to see how this works out.
Gotcha.
This does mean that you pretty much like there's not really a target count where you stop pushing Rising Sun Kick. Currently there is. I don't remember the exact number offhand, but you can hit that point in keys without without doing insane pulls in current content. But with this, you just always you need to push Rising Sun Kick. So, yeah. Although I guess technically, you can still probably get the rest of the bonus, the and when you dodge bonus, without pushing Rising Sun Kick. But you're gonna dodge more if you're pushing Rising Sun Kick, and also Rising Sun Kick damage.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It looks like a fine tier set. It is one that is going to be much better in Mythic Plus than in Raid, which is kind of the opposite of the Mistweaver one.
Yeah, exactly. Although I will say the 4 set, which didn't receive any changes this week, is good in both sets of content. Basically like a healing buff triggered by drinking Thunder Focus Tea or Mana Tea. So you'll use both those in both those sets of content. So
yeah,
no, it's
and I guess actually, so the 2-piece for Brewmaster, which I don't think we talked about before, but it is Blackout Kick damage increased by 20%, and you have a 10% chance to not have your Elusive Brawler stacks reset when you dodge.
Yeah.
Which is actually just like pretty big value. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that actually is a lot.
Yeah. Gotcha. No, it's they've seemed to up their game with the tier sets this patch. They're starting to branch out a little bit. So cool. I think that was a very long week in review. Lots of I think things occurred last week. So we don't have much time to talk about the 10.0 to 7, but
We kind of already talked about some of the 10.0 to 7 stuff, but you had some stuff you wanted to talk about from the zone, it sounded like.
I did, yeah. So the zone itself. So a bunch of stuff happened in 10.0 to 7. You don't want to recap all of it. I will say a couple things from my experience. Number one, I'm a goblin now, which is awesome.
Congratulations, I guess.
Yeah, love goblin monks. The casting animations are cool. Just this characters are small. It's tiny. It's awesome. And then yeah, the changes to Mistweaver. I guess I know we didn't talk too much about it, but doing the raid. Could definitely feel the difference, particularly with like the way that Ancient Teachings is working now, and then like Chi-Ji, the bubbles that it puts out, I think are interesting.
Nice.
So all in all, I had fun. But yeah, the new zone. So there's a new zone, Forgotten Reaches, I want to call it. I think. Yeah. So it opens up. It's sort of very similar. There's like a story to it, which you're going to some vault or whatever. And so I will say that New Zone's cool. Didn't realize there was new dragon riding talents. I think we talked about this, but like I randomly found a token and I was like, why are there dragon riding tokens here?
Yeah,
and then I checked my talent. I was like,
experience.
There's like 3 more points. I was like, oh, so I still haven't found the other 2. I'll be completely honest with you, but
I flew around and got them all. The new thing, so the new dragon riding ability is basically you get to stop midair. You just stop. And why would you want to do that? Basically, because sometimes it's really hard to land on small platforms when you're moving at high speeds on your
Yes.
dragon. Um,
Yes.
so that's the whole reason for it, is like you just like have the ability now to you're moving really fast, you hit this button and you like slow down massively and land on the platform. That's
Hmm.
nice. Once you fully upgrade it, it also refunds a charge of like a dragon riding,
Oh,
an orb.
vigor.
Yeah, vigor. It restores one vigor when you do it, if you do it while you're at high speeds. So if you're at
Okay.
high speed, you do it. It takes more vigor to reach high speeds than you get back from doing this. So there's no reason to do it for like travel. But it
Okay.
does mean that like if you want to land on a hilltop and pick an herb and you stop with the thing in order to land there, um, you have a little bit more vigor to use when you take off.
Yeah, it feels like something that'd be good for the flags at the top of mountains,
Yeah.
that are also back, by the way, because I found one of those,
Yes. Yes.
in the new zone. So, yeah, lots of that. But then I guess the biggest piece of content on the new zone are the new rings with the gems, and the way you collect a lot of those gems is through this vault. So there's like an instanced vault that you go in and you sort of open locked doors, and there's different things behind the doors, like gems are one of them, but other sort of collectibles and currencies for things. And the way it works is you start out with seven. So your introductory quest gives you seven keys, and then you can go in the vault and open them. I did so. My mess up was basically seeing that first quest of saying, "Cool, got my seven keys," running over to the vault and opening up seven doors, not realizing there's like a couple of other things that you need the key, you need to open the doors in that place for it to do. Like there's a quest to collect pages for some reason. Didn't get that done. There's a quest for the to unlock like the jailer, or sorry, the jeweler's tools, which
Right.
let you take
Which,
gems out without destroying them
to be
and things like
clear,
that.
the doors that you open are like permanent per week. Like, so you going
Yeah.
in and opening those doors. If you do that and you go get the pages quest, like you still have the doors open. They
Hmm.
may not be the doors that you need open to get your like jeweler's tools or whatever,
Yep.
but they are still open for you to do other things.
Yeah. So I did not realize that at all until I went back in the second time. So yeah, so I ended up just opening them random seven doors. Like one's really high up, mostly because I was like, oh, if it's high up in the vault, it's got to have better things in it. That's
Yeah,
actually not the case.
not how it
Um,
works.
at all. So yeah, so then I get the next set of quests, and I'm like, oh, you have to go back in and get the jeweler's thing. So I go back in and I try to open a door, and there was like you missing the key reagent. I was like, oh, that's what those keys are for.
Yeah,
So I had to spend some time farming up more keys to get my
yeah,
jeweler's thing. Spend some more time farming up keys just to open up the rest of the doors. I'll do that maybe a little
yeah.
bit tonight, but that
Oh,
was my big mess up. So,
pro tip actually. So there's on Forbidden Reach, there's this envoy thing. We talked about it a little bit last week. You can talk to
mhm,
them every day and pick a faction to kind of champion for the day and get a daily from that. One of the envoys there is from the Dragon Scale expedition. They sell an
mhm.
item. I don't remember what it's called. It's like a bag. It costs 2,000 elemental overflow, and you open the bag, and it can contain vendor trash, more elemental
Uh,
overflow, and keys.
oh, okay, okay.
So, and it actually typically will contain quite a bit of elemental overflow. So, like, I went, one time with, 4,000 elemental overflow and opened like 8 bags,
Oh,
despite
geez,
it
okay.
costing 2,000 per.
Th-
So,
Yeah.
if you
Oh,
don't
interesting.
get, a key, you're pretty likely to get enough elemental overflow that you can continue doing it. So, that is a really good way to take like, so everything that you do on the island is going to give you some elemental flow pretty much. You can run
Hmm.
around and do rares and run around and do events and all that stuff, and it will give you elemental overflow. And then you can come back here and you can turn it into chances for keys. All those things can also drop keys. Rares are a great source of getting keys. Some of them are kind of
Hmm.
hard to find, but you can do that. And um, that just like basically lets you double up. Like a rare gives you like half of one bags. So if you do two
Gotcha.
rares, you have two shots of getting keys from the rares themselves, but then also you end up with like slightly more overflow than is needed for a bag.
Gotcha.
There's also one
Interesting.
of the other envoys, the one for the centaur. has an item that you can get. It gives you a 1 hour long buff. It costs like 2,000 or 1,000 overflow, and
Hmm.
will tell you in advance that a rare is going to spawn and where.
Oh, that's cool.
And so if you're playing at a high pop time, I don't think you need it like a prime time, just because there are so many rare spawns. You can't hope to
Hmm.
catch them all. You just gotta like, go around to the ones you can. But if you're playing at a low pop time, they kind of spawn in waves, and so being able to be at the first one when it spawns makes it more likely that you can get to the second and third ones before they really die.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize all those items were there, so that's good. And the envoy thing was cool because I'm still not 30 or maxed on Iskar rep, so I used that to like gain a little bit extra, which was nice.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, no, that there's tons of like the yeah, just rares to kill and that type of stuff on the island. But then the other big thing, which is the or like the gems, I guess primordial stones. So the gems and the rings. And so the idea with this system is you get these, you can loot these primordial stones either from opening chests in the vault that I described where I screwed up. So I got a couple of gems that way. Or I think you can actually buy a item that lets you randomly select or randomly roll for a gem within a certain magic class. So each of the gems is like a magic that they sort
yeah,
of align to. Um, and the gems are interesting, we'll say. I think we talked a little bit about the gems last week, and the consensus that we had was that the gems are not very good.
boy,
Up
did that
until
change.
up until Thursday morning, I would have told you to, if you were doing any sort of heroic content, to just ignore the gems, because they were that bad. And then on Thursday, Blizzard went freaking crazy in terms of buffs. I think they started with like a hot fix where like one gem, like gems couldn't crit off each other. So there was another interaction where like one gem critting triggered a separate gem. I believe is the way it worked. And then they just went hog wild with tuning.
Yeah,
And I believe they actually released within the span of like, I think even like 12 hours, right? Like one working day on Thursday. I think 4 or 5 different hot fixes. Um, and like it got to the point, at least in Discord, I think you mentioned something too, where like literally every time we'd be like, okay, like buff came out, redo a little bit of the math. Okay, this one shifts here. This one's now a little bit better. This one's
yeah,
now even, right? Another hotfix would come through.
yep,
And so at the end of the day, I think at this point, at least from a Mistweaver point of view, I don't think there's been any changes since Friday. Like Volk has put up sort of the list for us and what gems are best. And so that's pretty much set in stone, we'll say for now. But it was a crazy day of like essentially gems going from you do any sort of heroic content worthless, skip them to these are the best. This is the best ring you can equip in all content anywhere ever.
yeah, yeah,
So like go and get like the gems, right? Basically. So
yeah. And so there were two kind of busted combos before all the hotfixes. One was the Humming Arcane plus Prophetic Twilight plus Desirous Blood that I mentioned before, where the one that leeches actually just does good damage by itself, but counts as a healing
mhm.
stone. So that was a combo. They added an ICD to the Humming Arcane one to break that combo, but there are other ones you can use to trigger it that are just not quite as good. Freezing Ice is a common one now. There's the Storm one that is also used a lot, but you have to be careful with that one in keys because it can pull things through walls and very far away, even if you're not in combat with them.
Nice.
So got to be careful with that. I think there are actually other stones that can do that as well. You just got to be careful in keys right now with that stupid ring on. And then there was a broken Healy combo. There was the Windstone thing where like
Yes.
there was one stone that said when you move, basically you heal. But it was like a tiny or when you no. It was when you move, you give people around you a movement, small movements. And then
Oh.
there's a stone. That's a nature stone they did. And then there's a stone that says when a nature stone triggers, heal.
Yeah.
So you just like did the good old 80-80
Moved.
shuffle and did like
uh,
30k HPS from your ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. That was
Yeah.
that was a little broken for a couple hours. So there
Yeah.
was. I mean, I think a couple like it was prime time. It was like right around raid time for EU on Thursday. Um, and yeah, when a lot of these were going in, there was a couple of raids. At least I saw a couple of logs. They're probably no longer active now, but where it was like the DPS equipped nothing but the healing combo rings, and like they brought like less healers,
Yeah.
like 1-2
I mean,
healers. So
that's the kind of thing where if you have your whole melee group, just wear those. Like if you have like 6-7 melee,
yeah,
you actually have just like replaced a resto druid in a half.
yeah,
Like you
yeah,
don't get cooldowns, and that's the big thing. Is it's just like constantly shitting out resto, like healing like a resto druid with hots on the raid,
uh-huh,
but you don't have a big like tree of life or convoke ramp, that kind of thing, flourish ramp, that kind of thing.
yeah,
So there's a lot of uh value in healers that's tied to their cooldowns that raids are kind of built around. So you can't
hmm
literally replace all your healers with these rings, but you know, you could do a lot. That's I think that combo got nerfed, like that got broken, right?
yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um yeah.
Yeah, it's these rings were nuts, and like the amount of changes that went in is staggering. So I think it's good. I mean, it's good number one that Blizzard came out with a blog. It came out, I think, as a part of their pre 10.0.7 press blitz, and the questions that were asked is like they wanted these rings to be good for everyone, right? Basically something you wanted to go and farm and interact with that content.
Yeah.
And so when they launched in such a lackluster state, I was like, oh, that's it. Like they'll just be like this the rest of the patch, and then we'll go to the next one. But I think this is sort of again the new Blizzard philosophy, and I guess it's philosophy of the way they're interacting with the
Yeah.
game is that they 100% push hot fixes as soon as they could to buff these things, and
Yeah.
they're not small buffs. I mean, some of these gems got buffed like
One
30%.
of them got
Like,
buffed 70%.
yeah, that's crazy. I didn't see that. That's crazy. Yeah,
Um and like I'm looking at my damage breakdowns from raid this week, right? So classic problem, if they tune the flat damage effects to be good for DPS, then they are just insane for tanks.
yeah,
So DPS are like, it's like a small upgrade for me to use, and a lot of people are using it because even if it's only a small upgrade or even a small downgrade, if you're
hmm
using the Desirous Blood combo, it just actually is kind of like Bloodset from Sanctum of Domination. It just gives you a bunch of passive HPS, and that just makes raid smoother. Potentially allows you to drop some healing or your healers to just do more DPS.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so that's pretty valuable. So the DPS are all like, yeah, I may wishy washy. Maybe it's a small upgrade. Meanwhile, for tanks, it's like 15 to 20% of your total damage done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And somebody did a sim like in the current state, you don't replace this ring basically for the rest of the expansion.
That's awesome. That's
Um,
awesome.
like this is now so overtuned that you just don't replace it.
That
So
is
like
that is
my
hilarious.
my monk and DK actually both have mythic Aranog ring and Onyx. uh my brewmaster pro tip: if you have an alt, only do the first two bosses because you can then only in your mythic vault slot you can only get items from Primal Council and Aranog, which means you have a much higher chance of rolling Whispering Incarnate Icon or the Aranog ring, both of which are extremely valuable.
Yeah,
That's how my monk has it.
nice.
um but uh, I may not replace either ring. Like
Yeah,
just period. I may not replace either ring.
yeah, which I mean, I think then what that says to me is that we'll see a run of nerfs when
Yeah.
the next season comes on. Season 2 is about to launch,
Like
but
probably, but also like I use Cyclotronic, the reminder, Cyclotronic the rep trinket from
yeah,
the Eternal Palace patch for not only all of Eternal Palace, it was better than anything else there. I used it for all of Nyalotha, and then actually it was so good that I used it for part of Castle Nathria.
that's hilarious. Yeah, yeah, no, and
So
I maybe Blizzard will be a little bit better about letting these rings go that crazy for that long, but it's definitely funny to see them put this much work into just making changes to it and buffing it, which like
yeah,
we a lot of people sort of get frustrated because it's like like Discord was always like, which gem's best now? Which gem's best now? It's like I've raid in 5 minutes. I'm like, at this point, guess.
Yeah.
Like this is what we think, but like wear whatever you want because they're continuing to change these things.
So I suspect
So
that
yeah.
we'll get another round of tuning on Tuesday. I think they'll wait for Tuesday, but I think we'll get a round of tuning. There'll probably be a blue post on Monday night, like kind of like here's with reset changes that we're making kind of deal. I suspect we'll get
Uh-huh.
another one. Um,
Yeah.
I don't have any foreknowledge of that. It just like the whole week was chaos, and I think they want to do more to it because there's still like one or two very clear winner combos for everybody that everybody is using.
Hmm.
And they want there to be a reason to use more than 3 gems.
Yeah.
Um, but
It's like a fire forget. Yeah.
yeah, but I think the number of changes that came out on Tuesday, there was probably some pressure on them from just the community at large to please calm the fuck down and
Yeah.
and let us let us breathe a little bit before you make more changes to it.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I would say that. That's for sure. Yeah. And it's I. Yeah. Just speaking of these changes, it's funny some of the questions people ask too because like with the way that we like produce, like at least the way that Volk produces his numbers, he sort of gives everything sort of a like an HPS value, but it's
Yeah,
values based like generally based on like a I think it's like a heroic level type like raider, right?
right.
And somebody comes into Discord the other day and was like, is something wrong with my gems? They're only doing like 2,500 HPS or 3,000 HPS, right? And in Volk's sort of write up, it's like, well, the top level pair should be about 8,500 HPS, right? So they're like, why is it so low? And then their log, the gems are doing 15 or 18% of their overall healing. It's their top heal. The problem is there was nothing to heal.
And it
So
was just
like
all over healing.
it was all over healing. And like we were like, like the raw number doesn't matter. It's like you want to look at the percentage and like
Yeah, yeah,
the gems like crushed every other ability. You probably could have not casted another heal and then just letting the gems proc, like, and it would have been enough. But
yeah,
like anecdotally, people I think get just in general like get so kind of hung up on like the numbers sometimes where it's like
yeah.
this combination will be good in all the content, use it. But it was definitely a hectic, maybe not for me because I was like working most of the day. So like I just was like
Well, I
jumping
was
into
working,
Discord
but
every
this was
little.
like job related stuff, right? For me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
by the way, I have no idea what is happening with the 10.0.7 partition now. Like, because of the
It's
number of
screwed up. I
nerfs.
lost my number one parse. I took a screenshot of it.
Yeah, you were rank 1 on Tuesday on Raszageth, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think there was only one total Raszageth kill,
Yeah,
which was ours.
yeah.
The time.
Um, but I have no idea what's happening anymore.
Yeah,
It's crazy out there. Um,
yeah.
there is one other thing that we wanted to touch on
Hmm.
from this patch, which kind of snuck in. It is now possible to craft there. So the old versions of Zul'Gurub and Zul-Aman
Oh
that
yeah.
were removed in Cataclysm when they re-released the dungeons, or released the troll dungeons in Cataclysm, remade them.
Hmm.
Um, there was a bunch of gear, a bunch of transmog from that was no longer obtainable from those dungeons. Uh, that is now obtainable again because they introduced a way to purchase crafting recipes that give you the appearances. So you can get some materials from those dungeons, the new versions of the dungeons, to buy recipes and get stuff crafted for, and then get the transmogs from the old versions of Zul'Gurub and Zul'Aman. Um,
Hmm.
so there are a couple of those that are, pretty decent, I would say, but they still are sets from, vanilla and TBC, so they are very, very low poly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they look their
Yeah.
age.
Yeah, but it is cool that they've found a way. And I think this is like the right way to introduce some of this old stuff that like I'd like to see them do this too with some of the old Nax 40 items,
Yeah,
right? um which is like give people a way to like farm them up through like some other thing, like, and I think I haven't read the full post, but I'm almost positive this is not a like, hey, in one afternoon I'm gonna get everything I need to like craft the full transmog set I
yeah,
want. Like seems like it's gonna take a little bit longer to get everything, which I think I'm perfectly okay with, and I think it's cool that it sort of integrates into um, sort of the crafting system, which I think is a way, like the most fair way to bring back old world stuff that no longer drops is, make it a part of a crafting profession and like, you know, have people like work through that. So,
It
um,
requires, I believe, old world crafting skill, which
mhm,
is of course means you have to have leveled that because it's independent per expansion now. So you, like vanilla or TPC crafting skill for the leather set, for example. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so uh, get you some Elhide, I guess.
good, good luck with that. But no, this is cool. Hopefully they bring back, like I said, uh, other transmog things or other transmog areas like Naxford. I think is like the other big one
Yeah.
out of ZA or ZG. Sorry. So, um,
But yeah, I think that is it for the show today.
yeah,
Thank you all for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it and the other work that we were on the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. That is, I believe, currently the only place to find up to date information for which stones to use for monks.
yeah,
Uh, you're probably in luck that it's pretty much the same for everybody because there's like one healer combo and one combo for everybody else. But
exactly. Yeah.
as we get more tuning, well, that will be the first place that you'll be able to get that information.
Mm-hmm.
But that is it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.